Poseidon, Russia's new doomsday machine. This in itself is amazing. Can you tell us about that one real quick?
Sure. This is a little bit, it is related to EMP, but it's, I thought it was such a remarkable and disturbing new development that I had to write a special report about it. And this is basically a revolutionary new weapon that the Russians are developing, and they're about to deploy it. What they've done is they've built the most powerful nuclear weapon in history. It has a yield of 100 megatons. And this is 10,000 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. And they've put it in a robotized submarine. That is a submarine that has no crew. It's a robot submarine that's designed to guide itself underwater. And it's got artificial intelligence so that it could, we're not sure, they advertise it as being to create radioactive tsunamis, because a 100 megaton weapon would create potentially enormous tsunamis, 100 yards high, that are radioactive to flood the eastern seaboard. I'm not sure that that's the real reason. That might be disinformation. I think that there are two more realistic purposes to this machine. One is to track our ballistic missile submarines, because we don't have that many of them that are left on day-to-day deployment. We only have about 4 to 6 of our ballistic missile submarines out at sea. And the reason the Soviet Union never launched a nuclear war against us during the Cold War is they couldn't figure out how to get those ballistic missile submarines. They could destroy our land-based missiles, they could destroy our bombers, but the submarines were the one thing they couldn't get. However, if they were able to track our submarines with this Poseidon robot armed with a 100 megaton warhead, I mean, that will have a lethal radius potentially of hundreds of kilometers against our submarines. It could take the last of our subs out. The other thing is, it could be also, in addition to using it for a submarine, the real purpose of the 100 megaton bomb, could be for a high altitude EMP attack as a way of getting the submarines, because that will generate what's called the E3 EMP, and it would penetrate the oceans, and it could couple into the electronics of submarines and destroy them that way. And so they could have this twofold way, going after them directly with blasts from this Poseidon robot sub, but also using the 100 megaton weapon to blast the oceans to put an EMP on the oceans to get the submarines. The bottom line of this thing, though, that what makes me most concerned about it, it is the first time that a nuclear superweapon and artificial intelligence have been married together. And it's like the science fiction, like Terminator, these movies that have been warning us, the Forbin Project that goes back to the 70s, that have been warning for years about artificial intelligence being combined with superweapons as posing a threat to humanity. Coming real, it's actually here. That kind of science fiction scenario is actually here in Poseidon, and this is the first one. And interestingly, Henry Kissinger wrote an article in The Atlantic, a liberal magazine which I hate, but this article was actually a good one, because Kissinger was warning about this. He's warning about, he's saying, this artificial intelligence, the defense departments of the world are going to start trying to marry this together with super weapons, and then watch out, we could be in real trouble if this happens. And before the ink was dry on Kissinger's article, the Russians are actually doing it. And so that's a real, an additional concern we have with artificial intelligence being married to nuclear super weapons.
Tell me quickly about Vostok 18. You said on our radio show last week that this was perhaps one of the largest military exercises in world history?
Yeah, it may be the largest military exercise ever executed in military history.
With Russia and China?
Russia and China cooperated in a joint military exercise that involved 300,000 troops, 36,000 tanks and other vehicles, 36,000. 1,000 aircraft and 80 ships. And that's just the publicly advertised part of the exercise. We also know that the Mediterranean Fleet played in the exercise, and they were actually involved in a real war, launching cruise missiles into Syria while the exercise was going on. And the Strategic Rocket Forces missile armies and their bomber force was also involved in the exercise, though they didn't advertise that part. So when you put all these things together, it's larger than any military exercise that the Soviet Union ever conducted, and very possibly the largest military exercise in history in terms of numbers of men and vehicles and all of that. But the scariest part of the exercise, and the point of the exercise, it happened in the Far East, a number of very disturbing elements about it. Obviously, it should signal to anybody with a brain that there's a military alliance, okay, between Russia and China, because this exercise involved a thermonuclear war against the United States. In fact, in the course,
that was what they were practicing.
yeah, in the course of it was probably practicing an invasion of NATO, Europe, and a thermonuclear war against the United States, because in the course of 1 week they practiced 2 nuclear strikes against the United States. And I think to Main Street USA, when Russia and China are on the same side in a nuclear war against the United States, that's a military alliance. Not so to the U.S. State Department, however. The Obama holdovers and the deep staters in the State Department are living in this fantasy world that Russia and China really aren't allied together. But it's not the only time they've conducted military exercises. They've actually been cooperating and coordinating military exercises for a decade. This just happens to have been the biggest, most dramatic one where they cooperated. The other thing is, now, why did I say Vostok 18 probably simulated an invasion of NATO? Because Vostok 18 means East 18, and most of the exercise was conducted in Siberia. But they weren't mobilizing 300,000 troops and 36,000 tanks in Siberia to deal with any kind of a problem that was, and in cooperation with China, that was in Siberia. I believe the reason they did that is because it's very hard for us to follow what they're doing when they're operating in Siberia. They can exercise secret operations and secret special tactics when they're out there in Siberia. And I think that's what they were doing. We also know that that they were doing things like repairing roads and practicing deployment of bridges across rivers, big rivers in Siberia. Well, why would they be doing that? Well, obviously, if what you're trying to do is invade NATO, when you're going to precede that with nuclear strikes, you've got to repair the roads, you've got to replace the bridges, and so they were probably simulating a massive invasion of NATO involving tactical nuclear weapons, and using strategic nuclear strikes, including EMP attack, to take the United States out, Russia and China working together to basically conquer the world. And that's what Vostok 18 was about on the surface, the part that we could see, okay? And we paid no attention to it. Why? Because the media and the Congress of the United States was more interested in Judge Brett Kavanaugh's teenage sex life than they were in Vostok 18, which got almost no coverage because of the obsession over all of these false allegations that were raised against Judge Kavanaugh. Now, the thing that concerns me most about Vostok 18, though, is I believe there was an invisible part. This is my own view, okay? This is not the official view of the EMP Commission or others, but I think that it is no coincidence, as the Russians like to say, that just a couple of months before Vostok 18 happened, the Department of Homeland Security discovered that the U.S. electric grid had been attacked and penetrated by Russian cyber weapons, Energetic Bear and Dragonfly. And nobody really knows what these things are intended to do, but we know they got into the control systems of hundreds of U.S. electric utilities, hundreds of U.S. electric utilities, according to the Department of Homeland Security, and European electric utilities as well. And what it seems likely is that these things have logic bombs in them, so that at a point when Russia decides, they could throw a switch and black out the U.S. electric grid using those cyber bugs. This would be the first part of this new way of warfare, and that would be followed by physical sabotage and ultimately a nuclear EMP attack. And so I think that they were quietly practicing this new way of warfare, back at the end of the summer, and they tried that. Now, then Vostok 18 happened, possibly as a distraction, so that our intelligence guys would be more interested in Vostok 18 than what happened in the summer. But also, it's probably a realistic way they would approach war, because the Chinese and Russians are very conservative. They're going to want to win for sure. So what they did, I think, is they practiced during the summer with this new way of warfare against us secretly, and the Department of Homeland Security figured out part of it by discovering these cyber attacks on hundreds of our electric utilities, but even they didn't put it all together. But then, if if the new way of warfare didn't work and they didn't win that way, or if it only worked partially, then you'd do it the old-fashioned way and launch Vostok 18. And I think that's how it would probably work in the real World War III, that they'd try this new way of warfare first, and if they won in 24 hours and wiped us out, great, then they don't have to do Vostok 18. But if it didn't succeed, or succeeded partially, then let the tanks roll and let the nuclear missiles fly. And so that's another example of why I think where are we relative to this World War III? I think why I think it's 1938 or 1939.
Has World War III already started?
I think World War III has already started, frankly.
Why?
Because when you're putting cyber bugs into utilities, that's an act of war, or it should be regarded as such.